the jet lag and yeah, just the traveling, the tiring traveling. But
Yeah,
really
no,
excited.
but
How are things with you and how's things going?
same here. Carolyn, I was just saying we're so busy, but that's just standard for everyone these days. And I think this time of year, things really pick up. So it's just busy, but it's wonderful. I understand from Carolyn, we have a huge attendance today,
Oh my
a
goodness.
big number of, yeah, so it's wonderful. Even I think something like 8 new registrations just now.
Goodness
So
me.
the word is spreading, your good work.
I'm hoping that I'll be able to do justice to everyone's expectations. We'll find out, won't we?
Yeah, we will. But I just think it's just so relevant and so current, and it shows that kind of hitting a nerve. We really need this knowledge. So
Well, I'll be doing my best to impart some new ideas and maybe some interesting perspectives. That's what I'm
yes,
looking forward to doing. So I think
yes.
we've just asked everyone where they are. So we've got Canada
Mm.
and obviously Pretoria in South Africa. So I'm looking forward to seeing where in the world people are coming in
Yes,
from.
absolutely. It's always wonderful, and I'm always concerned about the time zones. Dan from Ontario in Canada. I hope it's not like in the middle of the night there, something like that. I'm glad you could join.
Absolutely. There we go. Germany. Hi, Maria. Lovely to have you with us. Spain and Malaysia. Goodness me. Lovely. Cape Town, South Africa. I don't know whether I shared with the audience last time. I've been to South Africa twice in my life. And on the second occasion I went, I think there's a run because I ran up Lion's Head, is it in which is kind of on the right hand side as you look from the bay up towards Table Mountain. My energetic youth.
That's right. So you did the run.
I did the run. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Brilliant.
And
Turkey,
climbed
amazing.
Table Mountain.
Yeah, we did go up Table Mountain, but I didn't run up there. Although I understand you can. I understand you can do.
Mm.
Yeah, but I didn't do that one. Uh,
Okay.
Melbourne. Wow. So Australia, Kitso,
Botswana.
my Kitso from Botswana. Wow. Uh,
And please, everyone, switch on your cameras so we can see your faces. It would be lovely to see everyone.
yeah, that would be great.
Lindy, they can't, but they can tell us in the chat if they would like to, and I can because we've got this as a webinar because we're live streaming to YouTube.
Okay.
But I think
Thanks,
we've got everyone
Caroline.
online if you want to start. Thanks.
Okay, I think so. It is 1 in South Africa. So let's be punctual and get started. I'd like to introduce myself. For those who haven't already met me through our first event, I'm Lindy Greber. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of South Africa, UNISA, and it's just wonderful for me to be involved in the research forum of the Good Governance Academy. And so today it's my privilege to introduce to you Perrin Carey from Ghostia, a company in the UK that's doing wonderful research and development in the field of interconnecting governance and culture, bringing in the human factor. And then, of course, before we continue, thank you to Carolyn Chalmers, our CEO of the Good Governance Academy. Thanks for hosting or letting us have this event. The interest shows that this is really an area of big interest to everyone. So without further ado, over to you, Perrin. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Lindy, and thank you, Carolyn, for the invitation again. And the opportunity really to share some of our emerging ideas at CoSteer on how organizational culture, this much mooted and talked about aspect of an organization, about how that's connected to the governance of organizations, and how perhaps we need to really look at the human aspect to our organizations in order to really understand that development. So I'm going to hopefully share my screen and open up. I'm hoping, just let me know if that's full screen for everyone. Brilliant. Okay. So our research program has been running now for about 1.5 years. And the first thing I'd like to say is everyone is welcome to join it. We're inviting organizations from around the world to join our program. It's free, but we do ask for a donation to the charities that we support. We also run a business and a piece of technology that essentially develops understandings of governance across organizations. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is Perrin. I've spent about 20 years in the field of governance, risk and compliance. I've worked for small consultancy organizations right up to UK public limited companies. So kind of diverse experience, but my interest is not so much in governance as one would probably look at it at the moment, but in how humans interconnect with this concept called governance, and how we can develop better functioning and operating organizations by really understanding human behavior and human activity. So these are Guernsey cows in a field at the back of my parents' house in Guernsey. And they were looking at me and I think they were proposing this quote to me while they were staring at me. And I think they were saying, man is definitely his own most vexing problem. And I think if we look around the world, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's inflationary rises going around the world, I think this quote is quite apt at this moment in time. I think these are significant problems that we face. However, if we were to resolve our own problem and our own relationship with ourselves, I think we would probably solve a lot of these issues and problems that we face right now. And I think the other thing I want us to take with us today is this quote. We're not so much afraid of our limitations, but the infinite that lies within us. And I think when we reflect upon our organizations, when we reflect upon what we call culture, I think we need to take this with us as leaders. We need to see that the group of humans around us are often fearful of their limitations. Perhaps we're often fearful of our own limitations as human beings, as leaders. But actually, perhaps we're more afraid of what we're actually capable of. And stepping forwards into that fear is perhaps what we need to do more often. When I last presented, I put forward some ideas. I thought it might be useful for those not present to have a quick recap, because it will connect through with what we're going to talk about later. But for those of you that did, maybe it's also useful for a quick recap. The first thing I proposed is that governance is beautiful. I drew an analogy and often explain the metaphor between the murmuration of starlings and organizational governance. And I put forward the proposition that wouldn't it be great if organizations could murmurate like starlings? And in fact, a lot of the work that we do in our research is making that connection and using mathematical modeling to measure aspects of governance like cohesion, collaboration, and agility, and quantifying that within organizations. I truly believe that governance is beautiful. Governance in our, what I would call post-modern era, is undoubtedly shifting. We're seeing emerging codes, guidance, practices, and organizations looking I think we've got someone just...
Sorry, Lindy, can you just mute, please?
In the background, sorry. We've got purpose emerging as a key focal element of governance around the world. We've got value generation The recent code of governance issued in Lesotho is looking at the concept of intergenerational value creation. You know, we've got an area of governance which perhaps over the last 2 decades has lost its way. It's moved towards a compliance exercise, this concept of comply or explain. I think governance has far much more to offer to organizations and indeed to the world. So undoubtedly governance is shifting. The other thing I mooted was that governance is complex. I don't mean governance is complicated. I'm very specific. Governance is a complex system. It's got multiple interconnecting facets that make up its composition. Even if you look internally in an organization, governance is complex. Now, as human beings, we like to find quick, easy, remedial solutions to problems. And we often look for those in a binary, linear fashion. What we're proposing at CoSteer is that governance cannot be looked at in that way. Now, I'm not saying, for example, that board diversity doesn't move or increase the quality of governance and decision making. It might well do. But if you look at the research, it's certainly contradictory. And the reason for that is because there are multiple interconnecting facets in that equation. So really what we're looking at is what's underneath the waterline here. This is the reality of governance. It is a connected but incredibly complex system. And if we're going to approach it, if we're going to understand it, if we're going to measure it, we have to approach it from this perspective. I proposed last time CoSteer's model of governance, 3 interconnecting domains: organizational culture, decision-making, and decision implementation. I talked about the fact that there were 5 C's of our model. It's connectedness. It's based on complexity. It's based on a continuum. What I mean by that is rather than we comply or we don't, the question is, where are we on our journey of compliance? Surely it's a continuum. Fourthly, collective. Governance is often mooted as a board responsibility, and I don't deny that. But good governance at board level doesn't necessarily translate to good governance across your organization. So I think governance is far more about collective cohesion than it is about simply just board leadership. And the last one I'm going to touch on, which I think will thread into our next 20 minutes on organizational culture. And this is on the basis of connection. Not connectedness in terms of elements, but human connection. Without question, probably everyone on this call will see that organizational culture is being mooted by regulators and international organizations and governments, and indeed maybe their own organizational leaderships, as being a key part of their organization. But I think governance and culture and their interconnection is probably what's more critical. Because culture in its own right is somewhat meaningless. Because what we really want to understand is how and why culture affects the decisions we make. Because if governance is steering, and steering is really decision making, then the fundamental question we want to ask: how is the culture in our organization affecting the quality of the decisions we make? That's what I want to touch on in a moment. We often look at governance as a problem to be solved. What if we change the perspective of that problem? What if we treated an organization not as a system of elements, rather like an engineering problem? What's the problem? Let's find the solution. What if we did as proposed here and treated it more as an ecological problem? Because if you think about an organization, it's a group of humans gathered together, a group of humans with individual and diverse life experiences. We bring them together and we try and make that group cohesive. That's not really an engineering problem. That's an ecological problem. So I think this helps us and guides us towards a different perspective. We've approached culture from this angle, from the perspective that it's simply a group of humans gathered together, often around a core purpose, very often with shared values, shared beliefs, and with some aims and goals. If that's the case, we need to understand about humans. Humans are fascinating creatures. About 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began to emerge as a species in the African grasslands. But they weren't the only ones. There were many other similar species also emerging, stronger, larger brains, more intelligent than us. So why did we as Homo sapiens survive? And why did those similar to us fade away? Survival of our species boils down principally, according to evolutionary psychologists, anthropologists, and the other sciences, down to one key difference between ourselves and all of those species that were competing with us at the time. It wasn't our strength. It wasn't our ability to defend ourselves. It wasn't our ability to attack. We have no weapons. We don't have claws. We don't have teeth. We don't have huge strength. In fact, we had smaller brains than those that we were competing with. What we were able to do was work together. There was one key facet that enabled our survival as human beings: our ability to work as a team. What we now understand from our DNA as human beings is that we are driven biochemically and within our actual inherent DNA to belong to a group. It is probably the largest driver, unconscious, that stimulates and promotes every single decision we make every single day of our lives. It is an inherent need for us to belong. This will be a familiar model to many of you. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we've probably learnt it at school or on various management courses that we may have been on. When Maslow created this in 1947, our current understanding of the biochemical systems and neurological makeup of our brains was not developed as it is now. Through recent, over the last 10 years, MRI scanning of our brains in action during our decision making, it's very clear that actually this should be at the bottom. Now, that might be interesting for some of you. You might go, well, surely our need to survive is going to be on our nutrients and our food and our shelter. Well, actually, what we now understand, and it connects with the reason that we have survived as a species, and that is that our drive, innate DNA drive to belong to a group, is not only our fundamental need, but it's also has ensured our survival and success as a species. So what we now understand from Maslow is that whilst he was correct, it was a foundational element that actually our need to belong to a group has both ensured our survival and has meant that we were able to feed, shelter, and protect ourselves from other predators. So where does this leave us in terms of understanding our culture and decision making? We need to just, for a moment, consider, where does this drive for belonging originate? And what are the elements of it? In 1988, Jonathan Balby produced a seminal work on what we now understand to be attachment. This isn't attachment in the Buddhist concept. This is attachment in the modern psychological concept. This need to attach to other human beings. Our need, essentially, to belong. Attachment has developed significantly since the production of his work in the 1980s. And what we now understand is that attachment is also in partnership with one other aspect, and that's authenticity. So these two elements, our need to attach and our need to be our authentic selves, are the key elements of our need to belong. The work by Gabor Mate has revolutionized the way that we perceive these two elements, and I believe is the fundamental thing that we need to understand as leaders, as governance professionals, and of anyone who wants to understand the interconnectedness of human groups of people. And it's this: we're driven to belong and attach, and for our well-being, we need to be authentic. But when authenticity threatens attachment, attachment trumps authenticity. So what Gabor is saying here is that our need to attach and belong to a group is more important than our need to be authentic. Imagine this in a scenario in the boardroom. And remember, this is all unconscious. It's inherently there in our DNA. We want to belong to the group in that room. It's important to us. It's evolutionarily, psychologically significant. The conversation is going in a direction where we're not quite comfortable. Although we may not perceive it, we are actually being driven to remain attached to that group, and we will sacrifice some of our authenticity in order to remain attached to that group. And this happens in every single group in which we operate: our families, in our football teams, in our workplaces, within our workplaces, in the different groups existing there, in our committees, in our little huddles around the water cooler. All these groups operate on these two fundamental elements: our need to attach and belong, and for our well-being, our need to be authentic. So where does this sit then in our modern, evolving and shifting understanding of organizational governance? Well, most people would probably agree that these elements probably make up what we perceive to be organizational culture. The purpose and the values and the beliefs of the people and the collective in that group. The leadership, both at senior level, but also throughout and within our organization. And then the consequent behaviors and ethics that exist within that group, and how these three things interconnect. So if this is the case, what is the role of purpose and values when we're thinking about the elements of belonging? And how do purpose and values support governance? Because they're embedded in models of governance that are emerging around the world. Well, let's reflect a moment on this idea. True values are not taught and declared. They evolve through the act and interaction of the living. They are understood at a near tacit level by those who live them. If our need to belong to a group is driven by our need to be authentic, authenticity is connected to our own personal values. If we're living our personal values, we are living in an authentic way. We are able to express ourselves and the values in which we share. But they're not taught to us. You can't put them on the walls of an organization and say, these are our values, because that isn't ourselves. That isn't authenticity. Values have to be lived in order to be of value. Because what we find is that only 1 in 4 in this particular research either have a strong belief in their organization values or apply them in their daily work. So values are adorning the walls, but they're not being lived in the halls. So we can see that our connection with our values, our need to be authentic, is being significantly compromised. Converting values to behaviors is really the critical step. And this is where we see the importance of being able to attach to a group with authentic and a psychologically safe environment, meaning that we can truly live the values that are adorning the walls. But in order to do that, the leadership in our organization needs to create a space where we can bring our authentic selves and attach under that authentic spirit, what businesses will call psychological safety. Daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. So for all those who are leaders out there, and that's actually all of us, because even if we don't lead another group, we lead ourselves every day. So what's important for leadership right now is creating a space within our organizations that allows for hard things to be talked about in an environment that's psychologically safe, that nurtures values in actionable behaviors, and allows for individuals to do what they need, which is to belong. Because belonging enables us to move forward as a collective. And what are the impact of leadership characteristics? Well, it's emerging out there that of the factors assessed, the one that makes the biggest difference is whether or not the leadership team is clear in the behaviors that are expected among its members. Because if the leadership are conveying the values, they are living the behaviors, then it becomes safe for us to challenge those behaviors when they're outside of our values. What does this mean for organizations then? What does this mean for governance? We've got models out there that put purpose at its center. We've got models out there that say that values and behaviors are critical to good governance. And we've got emerging regulators who are saying that culture, in their view, needs to now be measured. Well, this is a huge challenge for us as organizations, because our previous models of trying to influence human behavior, because let's not make any bones about it, rules, procedures, policies, controls, frameworks, risk committees, board minutes, accountability metrics, KPIs. What are they trying to do? They are simply trying to contain behavior. That's their objective. But if we look outside in the world and we look at the continued corporate failure, we look at the escalations in financial crime, we look at the huge increases in fraudulent activity, and we look into the organizations and we look at their reams of policies, procedures, controls, frameworks, committees. Clearly, it's not working. And I believe it's not working because that's not how you influence behavior. Because in order to be able to influence behavior, you have to understand what's driving that behavior. And actually, we know that conforming to rules is a very weak way of encouraging changes and shifts in behavior. Behavior is ultimately about a decision. It's about a decision to behave in a certain way. It's about a decision to speak to someone in a certain fashion. It's a decision about, I'm going to write to this person with this language. They're decisions. And every decision we make is influenced by our need to attach and our need to be authentic. So as leaders, what we need to understand most of all is what is the status of the psychological safety of our environment? And can our people, can our employees, can our wider stakeholders come into the environment that is our organization and speak openly? Can we have tough conversations? And if we can, then I think we're nurturing an environment which will increase our levels of governance. It'll increase the quality of our decision making. And it'll improve the performance of our organizations and groups of humans. It's absolutely paramount that if we want to improve the governance of our organizations and we want to understand and shape the culture, we have to understand the drivers of our decision making. Without question, we are our biggest problem. And it doesn't matter what issue or problem we're looking at around the world. As I said at the beginning, whether it's corporate failure, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's fraudulent activity and corruption in the countries in which we exist. Man is without question our most vexing problem. But understanding that man, understanding that person, getting to the root of every single decision that we make and understanding why we make those decisions is probably the solution to that problem. I encourage you all, leaders of groups, leaders of organizations, and even just leading in your families. All the decisions we make have ensured our success and our survival as a species. But they're also our biggest problem. Because belonging to a group is what has made us successful. But belonging to a group is also our biggest downfall. Because we will sacrifice our values in order to remain connected to a group. Thank you very much. I hope we're going to have some interesting questions. I just want to end with this invitation. You are all absolutely invited as organizations to participate in our research program. It's free, but we will ask you to donate to our 2 charities that we support in Guernsey. And we would love to hear from anyone with or who's part of an organization who would love to participate and join us. Thank you very much.
Wow, Perrin, thank you so much. Wow, this was just amazing, seeing how you link behavior, our need to belong, to our decision-making, our drivers of decision-making, to behaviors, to culture, to the organization. So thanks so much. It's so insightful and so necessary. Thanks. Okay, I think let's start and look at our questions that we have in our comments. I believe someone has asked whether you'll be willing to share your slides afterwards, but I think this event will be shared on our website, so you can access the event and the recording thereof on our website. Okay, and then you can see the questions. Would you like to just jump in, Perrin, maybe, and answer to them? I'm
just looking, see if I can find them. 1 minute. Where would I find those? I'm looking.
Okay, so in our chat, I'm just looking at the chat now.
Okay, great.
No questions in our chat at the moment, in our QA window. So let's work with the chat. So
okay.
Definitely a whole bunch of compliments there, and telling you it's very impressive and insightful.
Thank you. Okay, I think there is one question that I've just spotted. Does a shift of behavior, so this is from Boone, thank you. Does a shift of behavior require a shift of mindset and thinking? I think the semantics that we use when we talk about behavior and we talk about this concept of shifting behavior, I think I mentioned it in the presentation, we look for binary solutions to problems. That's our instinctive nature, because we're living in a very fast moving world and have been for probably 200 or 300 years. As a consequence of that, what we look for is quick solutions to problems that we find so that we can move forwards beyond our problem. When we talk about shifting behavior, what we've done in organizations is we've felt, well, let's contain the behavior rather than shift the behavior. And this is what policies, procedures, and controls do, right? They essentially are designed in order to contain our behavior. We cannot be trusted as human beings to act appropriately, and therefore we have created policies, procedures, and controls. Now, of course, it goes beyond just containing behavior. We create processes to guide employees through new concepts or new products or new ways of selling within an organization. So I agree that processes go beyond that. But one of the principal reasons that regulators expect to see policies, procedures, and controls in an organization is because it regulates behavior. It allows us to, inverted commas, be compliant in a regulator's perspective. So shifting behavior, the one way in which we have essentially overloaded our organizations is through policies, procedures, and controls. What we're proposing, and I think others around the world are proposing, is that true behavior shift is actually through a collective value and purpose-driven culture. So in answer to your question, does a shift of behavior require a shift of mindset or thinking? Yes. The shift of mindset or thinking is to expand our understanding that behavior needs to be shifted through collective value proposition. So in other words, just creating a series of policies, procedures, and controls is not going to shift behavior. It might well constrain you. It might well assist in process, I don't deny, but it's not going to shift your behavior. Behavior is connected to values and purpose, and normally connected to collective values and collective purpose. I hope that answers your question, Boone. Thank you. George says thank you. Thank you very much, George. Thank you, Stella below. Thank you. Brilliant and so deep. I hope I didn't go too deep. I tried to keep it at a level that everyone would come along with me. Having spent 2 or 3 years looking at this, I know it's easy for me to dive in deep. So hopefully you all stayed with me. Brené Brown rocks. Absolutely agree. Those of you who haven't heard or read some of Brené Brown's work, I strongly suggest you go and see it. Her own research suggests, for example, that in organizations that they researched, over 2,500 around the world, 90% of those organizations have values. They exist. They exist in the annual report. They exist on their screensavers. They exist on the walls. They exist in documents. 10% of those organizations have operationalized those values. We are missing an opportunity. We are missing out on what I believe is the largest influencer of human behavior that we have at our hand, converting values into behaviors. If we want to create agile, flexible, cohesive, and collaborative groups of humans, we absolutely do that through strong collective purpose and values that have been operationalized in our organization. Thank you, Boone, for that. Thank you, David. How could we bring and share this light at decision-making level? It's interesting. Yeah, I absolutely concur to the idea that culture is what drives large elements, if not most, of our decision-making. I'm not saying we don't have and need information to make decisions. We do. I don't so mean that we don't have to have training to support our knowledge and understanding as decision makers. But actually, interestingly, it's our need to belong to a group which influences our decision making every single day unconsciously. So in answer to your question, how could we bring and share this light at decision making level? I'm assuming you're talking about kind of leadership level. Because I actually see decision making is going on vertically and horizontally in every single organization, every single day, 1,000 times a day for each person. But if we just look at the senior leadership decision making, then what I would say is, do you want to improve the quality of the decisions that you're making as a board? If the answer is yes to that, then you want to say, well, let's understand what's driving our decisions and driving our collective behavior. So quite often when I visit a board, what we will do is we will have a discussion. And I'll often try and bring up a discussion that may be nothing to do with the business, but might be slightly controversial. And then we will look at what's going on in the dynamic of that organizational group. Some people will lean forward, some people will sit back, some people will remain silent. And then I'll ask some questions as we go through, connected to how safe do you currently feel? What do you feel that's emerging in your body? Are there any physiological or kind of biological feelings that are emerging? Because what we know from MRI scans of brains over the last 10 to 15 years is that every decision that we make is made in our limbic brain before it even gets to our prefrontal cortex. So if that's the case, then we need to understand the drivers of our emotions, and we need to understand how to respond carefully and considerately to those emotions that emerge. So how do we bring and share these things to a leadership? I think you do it through saying that this understanding is going to improve your decision making as a board, and it's going to increase the cohesiveness of your organization as a whole. And I would have thought any leadership worth its salt is going to want to do those two things. Let me just say, I will use and have used the words governance and performance interchangeably, because of course, they're the same thing, right? Governance is performance, and performance is governance. So I think it's a way into to a board discussion. Let's reshape, let's turn governance into a performance-focused exercise, because that's really what it was always meant to be. I hope, David, that goes some way to answering your question. Please let me know if it hasn't. I'm just reading here. Is that Busiana? I hope I pronounced that correctly. Different cultural and geographical background influence the organizational behavior, in your opinion, or not? Okay, yeah, okay, intrinsic, extrinsic advantage. Okay, right. Yes, absolutely, right. Our individual experiences, whether we talk about cultures, yeah, like sort of, geographical difference in cultures, so, different countries and the cultures, of course, but those are different because of the experiences that we have, both ourselves and that we essentially, yeah, that is inherent in us intergenerationally. So absolutely. So as a species, we inherit our own cultural understandings, and we then have our own experiences from birth upwards. So absolutely, it doesn't actually matter in terms of geographical. It's that each individual enters a room with their own cultural and individual experiences, and all of those experiences and decisions that we've made over our lives have been driven by the same inherent cultural DNA in all of us, which is the need to belong. Now, culturally, within different cultural frameworks around the world, belonging is talked about more openly in some cultures than others. But with regards to your question, does it influence behavior? Well, of course it does. Absolutely. Because our own experiences that we bring to an organization and we bring to a group will be influenced by those experiences. Let me give you a personal example. So as a human being who was adopted, my initial experiences as a baby was that I was rejected by the very human being who I should be attached to. That experience has an embedded effect on all decisions that I have made throughout my life. And actually, what we find as human beings, that these experiences, whether they're individual, easily identifiable events like that, or whether it's, for example, working in an organization where we were not respected, where we were bullied, where we didn't feel safe, we enter another organization, we enter another group of humans, we carry that experience with us. Does it influence our behavior? Of course it does. So yes, absolutely. In answer to your question, different cultural, geographical backgrounds influence our behaviors. Absolutely. But so do every single experience that we have and carry with us in our lives. You just mentioned at the end there, intrinsic values. Do you mean our own internal personal values? Of course, absolutely. And our experiences and our upbringing will develop those values within us. And it's why you often find, people will enter an organization and actually very quickly they won't feel comfortable within that organization. That's often due to a mismatch, not necessarily between personal values and the organization's values, but certainly personal values and the behavior that exists in that organization. Because actually you can look at every single organization's values around the world and go, well, I would fit into that organization because I have integrity, I have passion, I have enthusiasm. You look at every single board's values, you go, well, I would fit there. The real problem is not the value mismatch. It's the mismatch between our personal values and the behaviors that are being exhibited in that organization. Hopefully that answers your question, Basuana. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Rafilbay, personally, this has been the most plucky teaching on ethics and governance today. Are you very kind? Thank you very much.
Baron, we have 3 Q&A questions as well.
Oh, okay.
Can you access them there at the bottom, or do you want me to read them? Okay, great.
Do you want to read them? Give me a little bit of a pause. I'm going to take a drink of water.
I will in my best English. Okay, so we have a question from Zinzi. She asks, do leaders have to have better understanding of the human behavior, as governance is not a compliance tick box exercise, for example, undertaking training, etc.?
Well, I think my experience with leaderships that I've worked with recently is that they're becoming increasingly open to an understanding that their organizations are not just there to perform tasks and strategy. All right. I think there is a growing realization, and I think the challenges that we've faced in COVID and in other aspects that we're now facing, inflationary pressures, we're seeing great resignation, and then there's silent resignation, or whatever it's called, quiet quitting. I think leaders are having to address the fact that their organizations are simply groups of humans. Yes. Are some doing it more openly and quickly than others? Yep, absolutely. And I think the organizations and leaderships that are open to this and are willing to step into what Brené would call vulnerability, I think those leaders that are willing to do that are the organizations that are going to survive and flourish in what will be a very challenging next decade. You talk about undertaking training. Yes, I mean, certainly training and education is the first step, but of course the real challenge is actually embedding that training into your organization. It's one thing, for example, to understand that these things are important. It's another thing to actually truly action it within a group of humans. That's the vulnerability piece. The vulnerability piece is realizing that you need to start talking about these things more openly. And we need to start talking about challenging, difficult, and let's say behaviors outside of our values frameworks. Those are tough conversations. Man is its own most vexing problem. I hope that answers.
And sorry, Baron, if I may add, not only for organizations to realize their employees are humans, but taking a wider stakeholder perspective view, not only thinking about shareholders and the bottom line, but to the humans, the environment, or everything else around the organizations, more than just the bottom line as well.
Absolutely. And I think this connects, doesn't it, with, with our emerging understanding of what we believe ESG to be, which is this connection really between organizations and the environment in which they exist. And I mean the broader environment, not just this concept of greenery, but the broad environment, the societal environment in which we exist. You know, organizations are simply a part of that society. And if a small part of that society is not behaving well, it spreads that effect across the wider society. So organizations and how they behave, leadership and how they behave, directly connected to the quality and the well-being of our societies in which we live. I think ESG is you know, whether it's the right acronym, whether it's put in the right order, is all debatable. But is it the right movement? Absolutely. It is the right movement. It's the right concept. Okay. Huey, shall I go, Lindy? Huey, what do you think of the trust element is shifting? What do you think of the trust element in shifting behavior? Of course, trust is a concept which is mooted out there. I think it's a fascinating idea. Trust. There are different views on how we should approach trust. If you read some of the work that's been written by Adam Grant, I don't know if those of you who follow Adam Grant in the kind of culture and strategy arena, but essentially he will moot the idea that trust is something that you can just give. You can just give trust to someone, and that actually that's the best way of approaching trust. Other people will argue that you as humans we have an innate need, obviously, to belong to a group, and therefore we will offer an element of trust, because in order to attach, we have to do that. And this is the balance between authenticity and attachment, of course, because if we're not bringing our authentic selves to the attachment, there's no trust. So this is why we can see this balance of authenticity and attachment is what actually is a way of measuring trust, for example. So actually at Coastia, this might even be new to my colleagues who are listening in. One of the elements that I've been researching over the last 6 to 9 months is a methodology of approaching trust from measuring the two elements of attachment and authenticity. So organizations that have high levels of both attachment and authenticity, I believe, will actually have high levels of trust. Because in order to be able to bring your authentic self to the relationships that exist within your organization, you need to have high levels of trust, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that. So trust is obviously also connected to other elements that we use and I'll use this in business jargon, like psychological safety. So yes, do I think trust is shifting behavior? I think authenticity and attachment drives our decision making and therefore our behavior. So yes, trust is intricately connected with behavior. Thank you for your question. I hope that in some way answers it. Rafilwe, I'm just going to reflect and read and then hopefully answer the question. Given how the Rainbow Nation has evolved, indeed, the hopes and dreams expressed by Mandela, obviously, one quote of which I put in my presentation, thank you, versus where we find ourselves now, I know that it's incredibly challenging for you. Wouldn't you say that ultimately the pressure to belong to a group of income earners has resulted in our collective demise? The exponential increased silence against leadership failures in the marketplace, the misconception that ethics, morality, and governance are idealistic. Okay, we don't need a Rolls Royce, just a Yaris will suffice. Yeah, goodness me. I'll not sure where the question is, but I'm happy to talk around some of that narrative. I was reading a book on my plane journey, both to and from India over the last month, entitled Belonging. And it's written by a chap who is essentially what I would call a sports psychologist. But it's far broader than that. He's approached sport from a perspective of saying that actually team performance within a sporting setting is primarily influenced by the levels of belonging experienced by the team members. Now, I think that translates directly into any organization, of course, but he's approached his work principally from a sporting perspective. Now, he's worked with your cricket team. And obviously, you know, back in the day, a different name was given to your teams, which I won't say because I think that it's not probably appropriate. But now it's given the name Proteus, yeah? So now, of course, you've got this concept of a diverse, multifaceted, culturally experienced body of people, very different from, let's say, back in the 1980s. Now, what he talks about with that team is bringing those individuals from those culturally diverse backgrounds from one country together. And he does a huge amount of work with those organizations, with those sporting teams. And he starts from the perspective of understanding the identity of each of the individuals that are coming in and the ability to express that identity in a safe environment. So whether you're coming from, you know, the different cultural facets across your country, each of those individuals should be able to express that identity in a safe place. And the ability to express identity creates a culture within that team that allows for the acceptance and understanding of different cultural perspectives and views. And it also allows for the creation of a psychologically safe environment, which nurtures a sense of authentic belonging. Now, he does a huge amount of work in this space. So going back to your observations about what's going on, let's say, in the corporate and governmental aspects of your country, which I know are incredibly challenging for you right now. I wonder whether it would be worth seeing whether or not we can, you know, get these concepts and ideas, which are clearly existing in your culture. They're existing in your sporting teams. But are they existing in your governmental and corporate structures? Perhaps not. I know it doesn't answer your question, but I do think it's a very interesting concept that within your country, you do have pockets where these concepts of, excuse me, of belonging, this driver of creating psychologically safe, culturally diverse environments are existing. And therefore, there are and there is hope. I hope that that answers your question in as delicate as a way as I possibly can, but thank you. Just saying
we are actually out of time. In fact, we're 3 minutes over.
Okay.
So if I can just wrap it up, Lindy, over to you to wrap it up. But from my side, thank you so much, Perrin. And from the Good Governance Academy, thank you. And we will be in touch with the next event where we hope to get the results of the survey that Perrin is conducting. Please go and have a look at the website. We've got the link to the CoSteer page where you can please send in your feedback and results, and you can participate in the survey so that we can give you the research information. Lindy, over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So I think the comments in our comment chat box and Q&A make it clear. Perrin, this is such wonderful, important and useful research with a practical or pragmatic approach. So thank you so much. Carolyn said it, the link is on our website, and you can also visit Perrin's website at CoSteer. So Perrin, thank you once again, and looking forward to working with you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindy and Carolyn, and thank you to everybody for coming along. Lovely.